when Elizabeth becomes queen, which she does in 1558, there are some problems she faces because of who she is, because she's the daughter of Anne Boleyn and she's a woman and she's unmarried. However, there are some problems that she would have to deal with no matter who she was, and these are problems that she's really inherited from the previous kings and queens. So those include Mary, her sister, who was queen from 1553 to 58. It includes Edward, their brother, who was king from 1547 until 1553, when he died as a teenager. And then it's their father as well, Henry VIII. And he was king from 1509. And between them, these monarchs really leave England quite an unhappy place, quite an unstable and divided place that's facing a lot of problems. And not just that, it's facing a lot of threats from abroad as well. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this section and also the next. This is a two-parter. So we're going to start off with the problems that Elizabeth faced when she became queen in terms of finances, because one of the things that transpires is that the crown is in a lot of debt when Elizabeth becomes queen. And this isn't her fault. Mary actually left debts of £227,000 when she died. And because Elizabeth then spends money on the army and the military, it means that she has debts of more than £300,000 to pay off, and that's more than the crown gets in a year. The reason for this, and it's not Elizabeth's fault, is because the other monarchs spent quite a lot of money fighting wars. When you fight a war, you have to pay the soldiers and you have to make sure they have things like food and weapons, and it's quite expensive. So Mary goes to war with France. That's because she's married to the King of Spain, and Spain has gone to war with France, so England joins in. Henry also went to war with France and Spain, and also Scotland in the 1540s. And so when Elizabeth becomes queen, the crown doesn't have much money. There are a couple of solutions that she could use for this. One is that she could go to Parliament and ask Parliament to grant extraordinary taxation. But Elizabeth doesn't really want to do this because, firstly, because that money will be tax and people don't like tax and it's unpopular. Secondly, because it gives Parliament rather a lot of power. Elizabeth can also choose to increase the taxes on goods that are coming into the country. This is called custom duties, and it means that the price of foreign goods goes up. So that's another option. She can also rely on the profits of justice. So when people committed a crime and had to pay a fine, or else had their land and their possessions taken off them and confiscated, that money went to the king or queen. So that's another way that she could have gained some money. The king or queen could also get loans. Apparently as well, and I love this, they could get something called compulsory loans, which was where they basically forced people to lend them money and then didn't pay it back. I'm not sure how that counts as a loan. But that was another option for Elizabeth as well. She could have got loans to pay off these debts. Really though, the best way for the king or queen to make their money is by relying on their land. The crown owned a lot of land, and one option was to really just take the rents and the profits from that and use them to pay off the debts. The problem is that the kings and queens who spent the money also sold off a lot of the crown's land to pay for these wars. And so that doesn't bring in the same amount of money as it used to. So Elizabeth has this problem of finances and this problem of debt. One of the ways that she deals with it in the end is just by cutting down on her household expenses. So she spends less on her household, and she also pays her courtiers less as well, in an attempt to get this debt under control. So Elizabeth inherits financial problems. There are also quite serious long-term economic problems in the country as well. So there is quite bad economic instability. Now, we go into a lot of detail about this later. I don't want to spend too much time on it now. So this will be quite a quick overview. But for a long time, England has been suffering problems with its economy and the system of money. And remember as well that a lot of people in England were really, really poor. It's estimated that 20 to 30% of people were just about keeping their head above water, and they were just about on the starvation line. People like the labouring poor and the unskilled workers. So these are the people who are getting hit really hard by this. One problem is that the population is rising. When the population rises, it means that there's less goods to go around. Things like food and clothes and essentials. And that means that people are prepared to pay more to get them, which means that the prices rise. There's also a problem in the 1540s when, in order to pay for his wars, Henry does something called debasement of the currency. And this is saving money basically by cutting down on the amount of silver that's in each coin. But of course that makes the coins worth less. And so of course the prices go up again. People aren't getting paid less, they're just finding that they can buy less with their money. And this is a real problem for some people. There are then also some agricultural changes, because some people find that they can make a lot of money keeping sheep and selling wool to other countries, and so they stop growing crops and they can't start to keep sheep, and sometimes they build fences around the land to contain the sheep, and this is called enclosure. In 1549, some people are so angry about enclosure that they have a rebellion in Norfolk during Edward's reign. And this is called Kett's Rebellion. And it ends up with 3,000 people being killed in fighting. So that's a pretty terrible event. The final thing to say about this, and I always find this really, really interesting, is that generally people can put up with quite a lot. And they can put up with really quite bad poverty. What really seems to upset people, though, is when they are having a hard time and they can see that other people are having a better one. And this is the case in 1500s England, because whilst the labouring poor and the unskilled workers are really struggling, people like the gentry and the yeoman farmers are really doing quite nicely, and they're making a lot of money out of the sheep and things like that. So we also have this pattern of rising inequality. And when there's rising inequality, there's quite often a lot of rising resentment and rising anger as well. People don't like to think that other people are profiting while they are really, really struggling. So this is another problem that Elizabeth inherits. She herself has financial problems, but there are long-term economic problems in the country, and this is leading to a lot of struggle and a lot of anger and a lot of anxiety in the country as well.